Love Beyond Memory, a story of loss, healing, and enduring love. I used to think love came like thunder, loud, impossible to ignore, and sudden. But now, years later, I know it doesn't always arrive like that. Sometimes it's quiet, like dust collecting on forgotten shelves. I lived alone in a city that moved too fast for its own heart, where people passed by each other like ghosts, staring down into their phones, barely looking up at faces. I wasn't looking for anything. I had my routines, my corner cafe, my gym where I never talked to anyone, my apartment 3 floors above the street where no one ever looked up, and especially not at me. Life was a loop, predictable and dull, but safe. I had convinced myself that was enough. Then, one Wednesday in April, everything cracked. I noticed her standing by her window across the street. I'd seen the apartment before, even glanced through the panes out of bored habit, but this time it wasn't curtains or furniture that drew my eyes. It was her. She wasn't doing anything unusual, just sipping from a mug, but something about the way she tilted her head as she looked out, as if searching for something distant, stirred something in me I thought had long since calcified. Her window was directly opposite mine, a mirror in which I could see a stranger's life unfold. The first few days I told myself it was nothing. I just happened to glance over. But eventually it became something I waited for. I'd delay closing my blinds just to catch a glimpse of her. She became the silent punctuation in my day. She watered her plants on Saturdays. She left her light on too late on Sundays. She disappeared on Fridays and returned with groceries. And then, one day, she saw me. I was standing too long by my window, coffee in hand, and she looked up. Our eyes locked. I panicked. I stepped back, but I'd seen the faintest hint of a smile. It was like watching color bleed into a black and white film. The next evening, I saw her again. This time she waved. My heart jumped in a way I hadn't felt since my early 20s, back when hope didn't feel like such a dangerous thing to entertain. I waved back, and that was the start. We didn't speak for weeks. Just gestures, smiles, a kind of nonverbal companionship. We built a silent friendship across the street, framed by windows and city noise. It was strange but comforting. Sometimes we held up notes on paper. Silly things at first. Long day? Or nice sweater. She had a cat named Vincent who loved to sit on the sill and stare at pigeons. I learned that through a note too. I told her I was a graphic designer who worked from home. She told me she was a teacher on leave. I never asked why. Something about her eyes suggested it wasn't a cheerful story. Eventually, we graduated to real conversation. Not in person, not yet, but through email. I slipped a note under her door one night. I walked across the street when the city was asleep and the air was still. My hands trembled as I left the note with my email address. I didn't expect a response. But the next morning, there it was. "Hi, window stranger. You're brave." That was all. But it cracked the shell of our distance. We emailed every day. Long letters, stories, little pieces of our pasts folded into paragraphs. She told me her name was Alina, that she loved old films and thunderstorms, that her mother had passed away 6 months ago and she hadn't been the same since. I told her about my failed engagement years ago, the one that left me with a scar that shaped my routines. We laughed through words. We shared playlists. We exchanged pictures of our breakfasts. It felt juvenile and fresh and hopeful. But we still hadn't met. I asked once, "Do you want to get coffee in person?" But she said not yet. She needed more time. I respected that. I wasn't in a hurry. Somehow, having her across the street made everything brighter. I found myself dressing better, smiling more, writing again. My days no longer felt like borrowed time. They belonged to something, to someone. One evening, I saw her crying. The light was dim, her face barely visible, but her shoulders were shaking, and she wiped at her cheeks again and again. My chest tightened. I sent an email immediately. "Are you okay?" No answer that night. The next morning, a short reply. "Today's hard. Please don't worry." But I did. I worried the entire day. That night, I saw her light go off earlier than usual. No silhouette at the window. No Vincent. Nothing. The apartment looked abandoned. The next 3 days were silent. Her email didn't come. Her curtains didn't move. I debated knocking on her door again, but what if she just needed space? I didn't want to be the one to breach her safety. Still, something felt wrong. On the 4th day, I received an email. "I'm sorry for disappearing. Can we talk soon? In person?" My hands shook as I typed, "Wes." We met at the small park a block away. She wore a long beige coat and had Vincent's fur clinging to her sleeves. Her eyes looked tired but kind. I remember thinking she looked exactly like I'd imagined. Fragile but grounded, like porcelain warmed by sunlight. We sat on a bench. We didn't say much at first, just watched the wind tug at the leaves. Then she spoke, and I hung on to every word. Her mother's death had pulled the ground from under her. She had been her best friend, her anchor. After she died, Alina withdrew from everything: teaching, friends, music. She moved into this apartment because it was cheap and anonymous. Then she noticed me. She didn't want to feel anything again, she said, but there I was, making coffee in the same robe every morning, living quietly across from her, sometimes dancing when I thought no one was watching. She had watched me longer than I'd known, and that made us laugh. From that day, we started meeting regularly. Cafes, long walks, quiet afternoons at each other's apartments. Everything was slow, respectful, kind. There were no declarations of love, no dramatic fireworks. Just presence, just consistency. She came to know all my flaws. I hoarded mugs, I snored, I over-explained everything, and I learned hers. She shut down when overwhelmed, she hated being touched unexpectedly, and she never let herself cry in front of anyone. Except me, eventually. I began to think this was it. This was love, not as a storm, but as a gentle tide, pulling you in slowly, never letting go. I started imagining a life together, vacations, a shared bed, mornings with Vincent purring at our feet. She hadn't said she loved me yet, and I hadn't either, but we didn't need to. Everything in our rhythm said it for us. Until one night, everything cracked again. It was the anniversary of her mother's death. I'd forgotten. I had planned a surprise dinner. I decorated her apartment with candles. When she walked in, she froze. Her face collapsed into something unreadable. I went to hug her, but she backed away. "I can't," she whispered, and walked out. Just like that. She didn't answer my calls for 2 days. I stayed up refreshing my inbox, checking for a knock on the door, anything. On the 3rd day, a note appeared under my door. "I need time. I'm sorry. Please don't wait." It gutted me. I read it over and over, searching for loopholes. But it was clear. I didn't know what to do with that silence. I went back to watching the window across the street, but the curtains stayed closed. The apartment seemed lifeless. Vincent didn't appear anymore. I didn't even know if she was still there. Weeks passed. Then months. I tried dating again, but everything felt like cardboard. Nothing had her eyes, her voice, her way of making the world feel smaller, quieter, safer. I buried myself in work. I stopped checking the window. I deleted the playlists. I tried to convince myself it had just been a phase, a strange connection in a strange season. But some nights I still woke up hoping to see her light flicker on. Some nights I swore I heard Vincent's meow carried by the wind, and then, one night, I heard a knock on my door. Not a memory, not a dream, a real knock. My heart hesitated. My feet moved. When I opened the door, I didn't expect what I saw. It wasn't Alina. It was a man I had never seen before. He looked tired, confused. He asked if I knew the woman who used to live across the street. My stomach sank. I nodded. He handed me an envelope. "She asked me to give this to you." I was her cousin. I opened it as he walked away, disappearing down the stairs before I could ask anything more. Inside was a letter, a single page. It read, "I never meant to vanish. I just didn't know how to stay. Loving you felt too safe, too warm, and I didn't believe I deserved it. I had to leave to learn how to live with what I'd lost." If you're reading this, I hope you've moved on. But if you haven't, opened the window tomorrow at 7 p.m. I didn't sleep. I waited. And the next evening, at exactly 7 p.m., I opened the window. Her curtains were drawn back. Her face appeared in the glass, smiling softly like she never left. And just like that, everything began again. The second beginning was quieter. No grand confessions, no tearful embraces. Just two people standing across the street from each other, smiling through glass like they had done once before, years ago. The moment she reappeared felt too fragile to touch, as if saying anything aloud might shatter it. But the next day, the first message came, slipped under my door in handwriting I hadn't realized I memorized. Would you like to meet at the cafe tomorrow at 6? No name, no explanation, just that one line. I stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before folding it carefully and placing it in the drawer beside my bed, right next to the letter she left me months ago. I arrived at the cafe early. The same table we used to sit at, near the window where the light hit just right around sunset. I watched the door like a man watching the tide, and when she walked in, I felt the same pull I always had. She looked older, not by years but by experience, like someone who had lived a whole new life in the time she'd been gone. Her hair was shorter, her eyes more cautious, but her presence still filled the space like music. She sat down without a word. We didn't touch, didn't hug. There was too much weight in the air. For a while, we just sat there, the hum of background noise from coffee machines and quiet conversation creating a shell around us. Finally, she spoke. I thought I could forget this city, she said, her fingers running over the lip of her mug. I moved in with my aunt in Marseille. Ocean, quiet town, simple life. But even there, I still looked for your window. I swallowed hard, unsure whether to speak. She looked at me then, really looked, like someone bracing for a verdict. I wasn't okay. I kept pretending I was. I thought if I could disappear completely, I could fix myself, but healing didn't come like that. It didn't come at all. Not until I stopped running. I wanted to reach for her hand but held back. Why did you come back? She looked out the window and let a faint smile escape. Because I couldn't stop writing to you. I never sent the emails, but I wrote one every week. They filled my drafts folder like prayers I didn't think you'd ever read. She turned to me. I kept thinking about that night, the anniversary. The way I ran. You were trying to love me and I punished you for it. But I shook my head. You weren't ready. I knew. I just didn't know what to do when you disappeared. We talked until the sky went dark and the cafe emptied around us. We didn't try to solve everything in one sitting. Some hurts don't fade in a conversation, but we promised, quietly, to try again. Not to pick up where we left off, but to start over with what we had now. She didn't move back into her old apartment. That felt like tempting fate. Instead, she found a place a few blocks away, close enough to walk, far enough to breathe. We took it slowly. Dinners once a week turned into weekends together. Afternoons in silence became mornings filled with laughter. We weren't trying to recreate the past. We were building something new. But beneath all of that, something had changed. I noticed she flinched sometimes when I asked too many questions. When we walked past a family or saw mothers with children, her eyes would glaze. She never mentioned her mother anymore. I didn't press. I wanted her to feel safe. And yet, a part of me feared that we were living on borrowed time again. One night, as we lay on my couch watching an old film, she turned to me suddenly and said, "Do you ever feel like the past is a shadow that keeps moving closer, no matter how fast you walk?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't answer immediately. I watched the flicker of light from the screen dance across her face. "Sometimes," I said. "But shadows can't hurt you if you don't let them in." She nodded, but her face stayed clouded. "I got a letter," she said after a long pause. "From my father." I froze. She had never spoken about him. Not once. I didn't even know he knew where I was. She continued. "He wants to meet. He's in town." I sat up, trying to read her. "Do you want to see him?" She hesitated. "I don't know. He left when I was 6. Never called. Never wrote. My mom raised me alone. She hated him for what he did. But part of me, I guess I just want to know why." I didn't know what to say. There are some wounds so old and deep that they calcify. Digging into them risks breaking more than you heal. But I saw something in her then, a mixture of fear and longing, a need for answers. Then meet him, I said gently. But only if it's for you. Not for closure. Not for peace. Just for truth. She nodded, and for the first time since she returned, I saw her walls shake. The following weekend, she went to meet him. She asked me not to come, said she needed to face it alone. I waited, pacing the apartment, pretending to read, to cook, to do anything other than stare at the clock. When she returned that night, her face was unreadable. "He's sick," she said. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He wanted to see me before he died." Her voice was hollow, detached. "He told me he regretted everything. That leaving was the biggest mistake of his life. That he watched me grow up through photos Mom sent him in secret. That he never stopped loving me." I didn't know if it was true, and I don't think she did either. But she cried that night in my arms. Loud, messy sobs that felt like years of silence breaking. I didn't ask questions, I just held her. Over the next few weeks, she visited him regularly. Sometimes she came back angry. Sometimes she was quiet. But something was shifting in her, like a door unlocking, one hinge at a time. In the midst of that, we began talking about moving in together. It was my idea, cautiously floated over breakfast one morning. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. We started spending more time at her place. Vincent had grown older, slower, but still slept between us like a guardian. It began to feel like a life. Then, in early spring, she told me she was pregnant. I blinked. Time slowed. I hadn't expected it. We hadn't even talked about kids. Her face was unreadable, equal parts fear and wonder. "I took the test 3 times, she whispered. "All positive." I reached for her hand. What do you want to do?" "I don't know," she said. I always thought I didn't want kids. I was afraid I'd ruin them the way I felt ruined. But now, I'm not sure. We spent the next few days walking through parks, talking about everything and nothing. I told her I wanted this. Wanted us, wanted a family. But only if she was sure. She didn't answer right away. But the next week, she told me she'd made her decision. She wanted to keep it. Wanted to try. I moved in. We began rearranging her apartment, turning the guest room into something softer, warmer. We didn't buy cribs yet. We didn't tell anyone. It was our secret, our fragile joy. And for a while, everything felt like a new chapter. Alina laughed more. She began teaching part-time again. I watched her grow into a version of herself I'd never seen. Stronger, more open. Then came the call. Her father had passed away in the night. She didn't cry. She just sat down and stared at the floor for hours. I didn't try to fix it. I knew some grief comes without tears. A few days later, we attended the funeral. It was small, mostly strangers. A woman who said she was his nurse approached us afterward and handed Alina a small box. "He wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a collection of letters. Dozens of them, written every year since she turned 7. None were ever sent. She stayed up all night reading them. I stayed beside her in silence. In one of the letters, dated the week she turned 16, he wrote it. "One day, if you read this, I hope you understand that leaving was never about not loving you. It was about being too broken to show up. I hope, someday, someone loves you better than I ever could." She closed the letter and looked at me. "You already do." The following weeks passed in a blur of gentle chaos. Doctor visits, morning sickness, late night planning. We didn't talk about marriage. We didn't need to. Our bond had already endured more than some vows. But life, with its strange timing, wasn't done testing us yet. One morning I woke up to find her standing by the window, pale and shaking. "Something's wrong," she whispered. We rushed to the hospital. The heartbeat was slow, faint. The doctors did what they could. But 2 days later, we lost the baby. I can't describe the silence that followed. It wasn't just sorrow. It was absence. A vacuum that pulled the light out of the room. She didn't speak for days. I stayed by her side, but the space between us grew wider with every hour. I tried to reach her, but her grief was a place I couldn't follow. One night, I found her packing a bag. "I need to go," she said. "Just for a while, to my aunt's. I can't breathe here." I nodded, even though my heart cracked. "Will you come back?" She looked at me, eyes raw and distant. "I don't know." She left the next morning. No goodbye kiss. Just a note on the table. "Thank you for everything. If I don't come back, know that I loved you in all the ways I knew how." And just like before, the window across the street was empty. But this time, there was no letter, no promise, just silence. Only now, weeks later, I've noticed something. Every Sunday morning, at precisely 10, a pigeon lands on the sill across from mine. It taps 3 times on the glass. And I don't know if it means anything, but I've started leaving the window open, just in case. There's a peculiar kind of stillness that settles after grief, like the world holds its breath for you, but only for a moment, then continues spinning without regard for your cracked pace. After Alina left, time lost its rhythm. Mornings bled into nights without the familiar sounds of her laughter, without the clink of her coffee spoon or Vincent's low purring at dawn. I resumed old habits. Not by choice, but out of desperation. Routine was the only way to pretend the hollowed part of me hadn't swallowed everything else. At first, I told myself she'd return. I marked the calendar. Week 1, then week 2. After a month, I stopped counting days and started counting silences. I reread her note more times than I care to admit. "If I don't come back, know that I loved you in all the ways I knew how." That line echoed through everything. Her love, I realized, had always been hesitant, not in presence, but in permanence. She gave with both hands and took it back with the wind. Still, I couldn't hate her for leaving. I understood. When someone has lived too long with brokenness, they start to believe that anything whole is borrowed, fragile, temporary. And maybe I was that. Something borrowed, destined to be returned. I resumed work. The clients never knew what shifted in me. I turned in clean designs, met every deadline, replied to every message with a robotic cheer that convinced no one but kept questions away. Friends asked where she was. I said she was visiting family. They nodded with tight smiles, not pressing. I think they knew. They just didn't know how to ask. Vincent stayed. That was the strange part. When Alina left, she asked me to take care of him. "He hates travel," she had said. But I think she knew she might not return. At first, he would scratch at the door, cry at night, stare longingly at the front entrance. But eventually, like me, he gave up waiting. He started curling next to me at night, nudging his head into my ribs, as if anchoring himself to the only thing left. The only contact I received was an email 2 weeks after she left. No greeting, no sign off, just a single line. "There's a little chapel by the coast." I sit there every evening and try to understand how things went so quiet. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like begging or accusation. I had written so many drafts, deleted them all. Love, when starved of presence, becomes a desperate thing. I started walking again, around the neighborhood, along rivers, sometimes to the chapel she mentioned, though I had no idea which one. I'd search coastal towns on the map and let instinct guide me. Foolish, maybe. But it gave me purpose. It made me believe she hadn't dissolved entirely into memory. One such walk led me to a secondhand bookstore I'd never noticed. I wandered in, not looking for anything, but found a weathered notebook on a back shelf, leather-bound, pages yellowed by time. Inside were handwritten poems in 2 different hands. Love poems. Sad ones. Hopeful ones. Angry ones. It felt intimate, like opening someone's private heartbreak. I bought it without knowing why. That night I read through every page, imagining a story between the 2 writers. One chasing, one fleeing. And in their words, I saw myself and Alina. Different names. Same H. Weeks turned into months. Winter crept back in. The window across the street remained dark. One night, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart did that traitorous thing it always did, hoping. But it wasn't her. It was a young woman with a manila envelope. "Are you him?" she asked. I nodded. She wanted me to give this to you. Before I could ask, she turned and left. No explanation, no return address. Inside the envelope were photographs, dozens, all taken by Alina. I never knew she'd taken any of me, but there I was. Through the window, making coffee, reading, dancing like an idiot when I thought no one was watching. Each photo was dated, and beneath them, a nota. I documented the days I fell in love with you, because I was too afraid I'd forget what love looked like. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the miscarriage. I sat on the floor for hours, surrounded by those still images of a life we almost had. One picture caught my eye. One of Vincent, sitting on the windowsill with a reflection of Alina behind the glass, almost ghost-like. On the back she had written, "We both watched you every day." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I opened my inbox, and for the first time in months, I wrote her. I saw the photos. Thank you. I didn't know you were keeping those pieces. They matter more than I can explain. I've kept everything too. If you're still in that chapel by the sea, tell it I forgive you. But I miss you more than I know how to carry. I didn't expect a reply. But the next morning, one was there. The chapel is gone. A storm took the roof last week. I take that as a sign. I want to come home if you'll let me. Not to restart, not to fix anything. Just to be. To try again with the version of me that knows what being present means. She arrived the next evening, no suitcase. Just her, standing in the doorway like a story restarting mid-sentence. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms and she walked in. The first few days were strange. Quiet, careful. We didn't rush. We relearned each other. Habits, tempers, silences. She would still disappear sometimes. Not physically, but into herself. Stare out the window for hours. I gave her that space. But each time she came back sooner. We talked about everything and avoided nothing. The pregnancy, the miscarriage, her father, her leaving, my waiting, my breaking. Nothing was off limits. One night, as we sat in the dark, she whispered, "I was afraid the sadness in me would poison you." I held her hand tightly. Maybe it did, but it didn't kill me. And slowly, we found a rhythm again. Not like before. Better. Not perfect, but rooted in honesty. We started seeing a couples therapist. We wrote letters to each other even though we shared a bed. She taught again. I started photographing instead of designing. It helped me see the world differently. Spring returned. And with it, hope. We didn't talk about trying again. About babies. About futures. But one morning she placed a tiny clay bird on my desk. It was painted blue with a heart etched into its side. "It's not a sign," she said. "Just a reminder that hope isn't dangerous anymore." I kissed her then, and for the first time in years, it felt like a beginning with no shadows. A month later, she suggested we visit her father's grave. I hadn't expected that. We drove out to a small cemetery on the edge of a hill. She stood there for a long time, hands in her coat pockets, wind in her hair. Then she whispered something I didn't hear and placed a photo on the stone. A picture of us, one I didn't even know existed. She turned to me and said, "I'm not broken anymore. I'm still healing. But I want to build something, not just remember." And we did. We moved to a small town outside the city, a place with slower clocks and warmer neighbors. I kept my work remote. She started writing, not teaching, writing stories, essays, mostly about grief and love and the places they intersect. She didn't tell me, but I found a stack of her drafts one evening. On the cover of the top one, letters from a window. We adopted another cat. A kitten this time. Vincent tolerated him with disdain. We named him Echo because that's what our love felt like. Something that kept returning, softer each time, but never gone. There are no perfect endings. Only imperfect people trying to choose each other again and again. Some days are still hard. Some memories still sting. But now, we meet them together. And sometimes, on rainy afternoons, she still sits by the window and stares across the street, as if remembering that first version of us. I stand behind her, arms around her waist, and we watch the world move. We don't need to speak. We've already said everything. It's funny how life doesn't give you clear chapters until you're far enough ahead to look back and realize one ended. Our days in the small town blended into each other with a softness that neither of us expected. The pain of our past, her mother, her father, the miscarriage, her leaving, never fully disappeared, but it changed shape. It settled into the walls of our home like old paint, visible only in certain lights. We didn't try to paint over it, we learned to live with it. And in doing so, we learned to live with each other more deeply than before. Our routine became sacred, not in the sense of rituals or traditions, but in how much comfort it brought. Mornings started with shared silence over coffee, her curled up on the window seat, me at the table sketching designs or scribbling thoughts into a leather-bound journal I'd begun to carry everywhere. Sometimes we'd switch roles. She'd write, and I'd wander the room restlessly, trying to quiet the anxious energy that never fully left me. We were stable, but not stagnant. Together, we had become something steady. Alina's writing began to take shape beyond the drafts. She submitted a few essays anonymously to small literary magazines. I remember the day one of them accepted her piece, a reflection on watching grief through a window, and printed it under the pseudonym Aim Lorne. She didn't tell anyone, not even her closest friend from university. Only me. We celebrated with takeout and a cheap bottle of red wine. She cried a little, not because of the publication, but because for the first time in years she felt heard. But that quiet life, that pocket of peace, didn't last untouched. Life, we learned, always presses in. It started with a letter. A pale blue envelope slipped into our mailbox, addressed to Alina in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it at the kitchen counter while I was feeding the cats. Her face went still. Her breath hitched. "It's from a lawyer," she said quietly. "In Marseille." She didn't say anything else for a while. Just read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "He left me something," she said finally. "My father. A house. A little one near the harbor." My first reaction wasn't joy or curiosity. It was fear. Fear that she'd disappear again. That the ghost of her father would pull her back into some version of herself I couldn't follow. But I didn't say that. I just asked, "Do you want to go?" "I think I have to," she whispered. So we went. The house was small and weather-beaten, perched on a hill with chipped white shutters and a view of the water that made everything seem older than it was. It had been locked for years. Her father had lived in an apartment in the city while renting the place out, but something about it. The garden left untended, the faint smell of salt and age, felt full of unfinished thoughts. Inside it was a time capsule. Worn furniture, walls lined with books in French and English, old photographs of people Alina barely recognized, a few pictures of her too, childhood ones. School portraits, one of her and her mother in a park she couldn't remember. I watched her walk the room slowly, like she was waiting for something to speak. We stayed for a week. I kept my distance when she needed it and held her when the silence got too loud. We didn't talk about what it meant. This house, this inheritance. We let it linger in the space between us. Then one night, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think we belong here?" I didn't know what to say. Belonging is a dangerous question. It implies permanence in a world that rarely allows it. She continued, "It's strange, but I feel calm here, like I'm not haunted anymore." So we stayed. Not permanently, not at first. We rented it out for a few months while we returned to our small town, tied up loose ends, and made the decision together. Moving was never just about location. It was about what kind of life we were choosing to build again. And slowly, the idea of starting fresh in that quiet house by the harbor began to feel like a continuation rather than an escape. The move was messy, like most beginnings disguised as endings. Saying goodbye to the town that helped us heal wasn't easy. But the house in Marseille welcomed us. We repainted the walls, planted flowers. She turned the attic into a writing studio. I found a co-working space where I could design and consult, blending into the hum of a new language I barely understood. And then something changed again. It happened during a routine check-up. Alina had been feeling fatigued, often sleeping longer than usual, her appetite fading. At first, we thought it was stress. The move. The weight of memories in her father's house. But when the doctor called and asked to see us both, the air shifted. It wasn't just fatigue. It was early-stage lymphoma. I remember the way she went silent, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow the news. I held her hand. She didn't squeeze back. The weeks that followed were a blur of appointments, second opinions, paperwork. Her hair began to fall out faster than we expected. We shaved the rest together on a rainy afternoon. She made a joke about looking like her father, then cried for an hour straight. Chemo was brutal. I watched her shrink into herself. The strong woman who had come back to me, who had rebuilt a life out of ash, now curled on the bathroom floor night after night. I didn't leave her side. Not once. I read to her, played her favorite records, cooked meals she couldn't eat. And through it all, she apologized. Over and over. I'm sorry you have to see me like this. I'm sorry I'm not who I was. I'm sorry for ruining this. And every time, I whispered the same thing. You are still the woman I love. One evening, when the worst seemed to ease, she reached for my hand and said, "Do you regret staying?" I shook my head. I'd stay in every version of this life with you. And that night, for the first time in months, she smiled with her whole face. Eventually, the treatment began to work. Slowly, the scans showed promise. The doctors used words like responding and remission cautiously, but we clung to them like fragile gifts. We took walks again. Short ones. She wrote when her fingers allowed it. I held her on nights when sleep wouldn't come. But sickness changes people. It deepens them, sharpens them. It took us to places in each other we hadn't dared to go. We talked about death without flinching, about the after, about what mattered. She made me promise that if anything ever happened, I'd keep the hats, keep the house, and keep writing letters, even if just to myself. I need to know you'll still live, she said. Not wait. And then, when spring returned, she started to heal. Hair grew back, her color returned. Laughter came easier. Not every day, but enough. Enough to start planning again. We made no grand plans, just little ones. New curtains, a garden bench, maybe a trip to Florence. One afternoon, while reading on the porch, she looked up and said, "I want to try again." I blinked. Try what? She reached for my hand. A baby. The world paused. I hadn't thought we'd go there again. After everything. After all the loss and pain. But her voice was sure. Not frantic. Not hopeful in a desperate way. Just clear. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. And even if it doesn't work, I don't want to live my life wondering if I should have tried. And so we did. Not with charts and schedules. Not with pressure. Just love. Just a quiet hope wrapped in each evening kiss, each shared meal, each whispered, "Good morning." And months later, in a small bathroom with chipped tile and morning light pouring through the shutters, she cried over a stick that turned pink. We didn't celebrate right away. We held our breath through every week, every checkup, every heartbeat on the monitor. We waited for something to go wrong. But nothing did. This time her body held. And on a cold December morning, after 19 hours of labor, she gave birth to a daughter with eyes like the sea. We named her Isolde. And for the first time, our window wasn't a boundary between two people. It was a frame for something new. A family life. Ours. They say holding your child for the first time changes you forever. But no one ever tells you just how quietly that change creeps in. When I held Isolde in my arms for the first time, her skin still red and wrinkled, eyes squinting at the brightness of a world she didn't yet understand, I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I simply froze. Because in that exact moment, nothing else existed. Not the years of pain we had walked through, not the ghosts of our past, not even the fear that had quietly accompanied every step of Alina's pregnancy. There was only her, tiny, warm, real, and the overwhelming, disarming truth that we had somehow built something the world had tried so many times to break. Alina was radiant. exhausted, trembling, soaked in sweat, but radiant in a way that only mothers can be. Her eyes met mine as she lay back against the hospital pillows, and I saw everything. Fear, wonder, disbelief, and love so profound it stripped both of us raw. Isolde barely cried. She let out a few uncertain whimpers, then calmed as soon as she felt skin against skin. I remember Alina whispering, She knows us," and I believed it. I still do. The first weeks were chaos. Beautiful, terrifying, sleepless chaos. Our house, once quiet and orderly, now echoed with cries, lullabies, and the soft rhythm of a rocking chair that rarely stopped. We took turns staying up, changing diapers, heating bottles. Alina, still weak from labor and the shadow of her illness, often cried without warning, overwhelmed by hormones and memories and the terrifying fragility of this new life we'd created. But through it all, we were a team, a unit built not on perfection but persistence. I remember one night, maybe 2 weeks in, the rain was pounding against the windows and Isolde refused to sleep. Alina had tried everything, feeding, singing, swaddling, and eventually handed her to me with eyes full of quiet defeat. I took her, walked into the dim hallway, and started humming the old song my mother used to sing when I was young. Slowly, she calmed. Her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, her eyelids fluttering like moth wings. Alina stood at the doorway, watching silently, tears streaming down her face. "You're better at this than I am," she whispered. But she was wrong. Alina became a mother the way oceans shape shorelines. Gently, persistently, with a love that was tidal and steady. She sang to Isolde in French, read her poetry by candlelight, and whispered stories about the stars. Even on her hardest days, when the fatigue bent her spine and the memories of her father or the miscarriage crept in, she always had something left for our daughter. She gave from a well I never fully understood, and maybe that's what being a mother is. Giving even when you're empty, and still managing to overflow. Time passed in strange rhythms. Isolde learned to smile, then laugh. Her first tooth came after 3 nights of fever and tears. Her first word wasn't mama or papa, but cat, and Vincent, now old and grumpy, accepted the honor with indifference. Echo, ever playful, became her shadow, always nearby, always watching. Our lives settled into this new shape. Friends visited. Alina's essays began gaining attention beyond small magazines. One in particular, a piece called "The Window That Raised Me," was shared widely. She was invited to speak at readings, podcasts, even a small literary festival in Lyon. She hesitated at first. "I don't want to be a symbol of grief," she said. But I reminded her, "You're not a symbol. You're a survivor. And survivors inspire." So she went. I stayed with Isolde, who by then was 6 months old and teething. Those days alone with her gave me a new perspective. I understood Alina better. Understood the daily sacrifice. The joy layered with exhaustion. When Alina returned, flushed from applause and new opportunities, she kissed Isolde's forehead and whispered, "Every word I spoke was for you." But not all days were easy. There were moments we fell back into old patterns. Alina would sometimes retreat into silence when she felt overwhelmed, shutting doors not out of anger but self-protection. I, too, had my faults. I became overprotective, controlling sometimes, afraid that if I didn't manage everything perfectly, something would slip. We argued, quietly, then loudly, then quietly again, but we always returned to each other. Always reminded ourselves what we had built and how easily it could have never existed. Then came the letter from her aunt. We had known she wasn't well, but the diagnosis came fast. Stage 4 breast cancer. Alina took the next train south without hesitation, leaving me and Isolde behind. For the first time since we had become a family, we were apart. And though she called every night, her voice thinner with each call, I felt something changing. Not between us, but in her. Something was hardening. When she returned 2 weeks later, after her aunt's funeral, she was different. Not colder, quieter. Her eyes carried a weight they hadn't before. She held Isolde longer than usual that night, then whispered, "We don't have forever. Let's not pretend we do." The next morning she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said she wanted to marry me. No grand proposal. No ring. Just her, in a worn sweater, hair tied back, eyes full of truth. We've already lived lifetimes together. Let's make it official before life decides to interrupt again. So we did. 2 months later, on a windy spring morning with only a few close friends gathered under the olive trees by the house, we said our vows. Alina wore a pale gray dress, barefoot, her hair down. I wore the same suit I'd worn to her father's funeral, repurposed for something beautiful. Isolde, now toddling, wore a white linen dress and clung to my leg the whole ceremony. Alina's vows were simple. You've seen all the versions of me, and you stayed. That's love. I promise I'll do the same for you. I didn't have the words to match hers. I tried, but mostly I cried. And that was enough. Marriage didn't change us, but it anchored something in us. There was a new security in the way we moved through the world. When Alina's second book was published, a collection of essays titled After the Window, we held the launch in the same cafe where we first spoke years ago. The owner remembered us. He gave us the table by the window, as always. Life became lighter again. Not easier, just less weighted. But just as we found balance, something shifted. Alina began losing weight, subtle at first, then more noticeable. She brushed it off. I'm stressed. Deadlines. Travel. But I saw the way her hands trembled. How she'd sometimes drop a glass without warning. She started forgetting words mid-sentence. Once, she called Isolde Uns, a name I didn't recognize. I asked who Uns was. She said, I don't know, then went silent. We saw the doctor the next day. It wasn't a relapse of the lymphoma. It was something else. Early onset neurological decline. Possibly autoimmune, possibly degenerative. No clear answers yet, just tests. More waiting, more dread. She broke down that night. Not dramatically, quietly. Sitting in the dark, whispering, I don't want to disappear while still here. I held her. I told her we'd fight it. Whatever it was, that we'd take every day as it came. But deep down, I was afraid. Isolde was too young to understand. But she noticed the change. She'd say things like, Mama forgets, or Mama sleeps too much. And when Alina stared blankly at a puzzle she used to complete in seconds, I felt something inside me begin to fracture. Still, we lived. We danced in the kitchen, painted Isolde's bedroom blue, read her fairy tales and told her stories about our youth. Some real, some not. We created a life full of moments so that when the forgetting came, Alina would have something real to return to. She began writing letters again, dozens of them, sealed and dated, some for me, some for Isolde, some for people she hadn't seen in years. One night I asked, what's in them? She smiled weakly. Memories. So if mine vanish, they still live somewhere. And then, almost shyly, she placed one in my hand. Open it only if I forget who you are. I haven't opened it, not yet. She still remembers me. Most days. But sometimes, when the sun sets and the shadows grow long, I find her standing by the window again, staring across the street, like she's waiting for someone. And I ask, softly, what are you thinking? And sometimes, only sometimes, she turns to me and says, you remind me of someone I used to love. And I say, I still love you. Then I wrap my arms around her and we stand there in that fading light, hoping morning brings memory back. So we continue. We live. We love. Even when it slips through our fingers. ChatGPT said, the final part didn't come with a warning. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden collapse. No tragic music playing in the background. It came slowly like a tide that had always been retreating but now did so with purpose. The first time Alina didn't recognize me, it lasted only seconds. We were in the garden, the sun warming the back of her neck as she reached for a lavender stem, and she turned to me with a puzzled smile, her head tilted just slightly. Excuse me, she said. Could you help me find my husband? I froze. The moment balanced on the edge of heartbreak, but I didn't let it fall. I smiled gently and said, he asked me to take care of you until he gets back. He trusts me. She beamed. He sounds kind. He is. And just like that, the moment passed. She kissed my cheek and said, you have eyes like his. It was the beginning of the end. Over the next months, the forgetting deepened. Words slipped from her grasp like wet leaves. She started calling Isolde, the little girl, more often than by name. Sometimes she'd look at her and say, "She reminds me of someone I dreamed about." It crushed something inside me. Watching our daughter smile through confusion, too young to understand why her mother sometimes seemed so distant, but old enough to feel the difference. I read the letter, the one Alina gave me, sealed and trembling in my hand months ago. I waited as long as I could, but when she began asking where her mother was, again and again, I knew it was time. It was short. If you're reading this, then I'm starting to leave you. Not on purpose. Not by choice. I hate this part. I hate that I won't remember the way your hand fits mine, or the way you look at me when I say something ridiculous, or the way your breath feels against my neck at night. But if I forget you, please don't forget us. Please don't forget who I was when I was whole. Tell Isolde I loved her every second, even when I couldn't say her name. Especially then. You were my home, my story, my peace. If I fade, don't follow me into the dark. Stay. Laugh. Love again. I give you that permission. I demand it. You gave me everything. Now let me give you the rest of your life. I held the letter to my chest and wept like I hadn't in years. But I did what she asked. I stayed. I cared for her. I became her memory, her guide, her shadow. I brushed her hair each morning. I reminded her how we met. I pointed to the window where she once stood and waved at a stranger across the street. Sometimes on good days, she'd smile and say, "That story sounds beautiful." It was, I'd say. Say. Still is. Isolde grew. She became bright, curious, endlessly kind. She didn't remember much about her mother before the forgetting, but she didn't need to. She loved her as she was. She would sit with her on the porch and read picture books aloud. Alina would listen with her eyes closed, as if the stories were familiar, buried deep beneath the fog. Eventually, speaking became difficult for her. She'd say one or two words, then sigh and fall silent. But her eyes remained expressive, soft, still capable of wonder. And she never stopped smiling when she saw us, me and Isolde. Some small, primal part of her still knew we were hers. Then, one morning in late autumn, she didn't wake up. She passed in her sleep, her hands folded gently over her chest, the blanket pulled neatly to her chin. It was peaceful. Too peaceful for a goodbye. I held her hand for hours, whispering all the things I never had the courage to say when she could still answer. I told her how much she had changed me, how she had taught me what it meant to truly love someone, not just when it's easy, but when it's impossible. How every day with her, even the hard ones, had been a gift I never took for granted. Isolde sat beside me, holding my arm. "Is Mama gone?" she asked. I nodded. "She's gone, baby." She leaned her head against me and whispered, "Then, we should write her a letter." So we did. We wrote her dozens of letters. We wrote every day for a year. Some were filled with stories, some with drawings, some with nothing but the words, "We miss you." We kept them in a box, the same wooden box Alina once used for her own journals. When the year ended, we went to the sea, the one outside the house in Marseille, where Alina had once rebuilt herself, and we burned the letters under the open sky. Not to forget, but to let go. Then we came home, and I started again, not because I was ready, not because the pain had faded, but because she had asked me to, because I heard her voice every time I hesitated. Live, laugh, love again. I found joy in small things, in baking with Isolde, in reading under the olive trees, in watching her draw cats with 3 ears and name them things like Fluffernoodle and Detective McWhiskers. I filled the house with laughter again. Not forced, not masked, but real. Slow, growing like moss on old stone. Years passed. The world changed. I got older. My hands ached more in the mornings. My hair grayed. But Isolde bloomed. She grew into a fierce, brilliant woman, all fire and poetry. She published her first book at 22, dedicated to the woman who taught me how to love, even in silence. I dated. Once. Then again. It felt strange. Wrong at first, like a betrayal. But Alina had been clear. "Don't follow me into the dark." So I didn't. Her memory never left me. I spoke of her often. I showed our old photos to Isolde, played the playlist Alina used to make, reread her letters every winter. She remained a presence in our lives, not as a shadow, but as warmth, as wisdom, as the woman behind the window who changed everything. And one day, on a calm summer evening, I stood in front of that same window and saw a reflection I didn't recognize at first. Older, weathered, tired, but still carrying her love in every line on my face. And for the first time in decades, I spoke to the window again. "I found forever in you," I whispered. There was no answer, but I didn't need one, because some love stories don't end. They echo. They return in lullabies, in glances, in shared silences. They are passed down like heirlooms, not as burdens but as beacons. I loved her, she loved me, we lived. And in every window I pass now, I look, just for a second, hoping to see her smiling back. Sometimes I swear I do. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.